Hello, everybody. My name is Brandon Dombrowski, and I'd like to welcome you to the introduction to the project management role at North Seattle College within the Application Development Department programs, particularly the practicums. One of the primary responsibilities of the project managers are to plan, obviously, a lot of planning, buy-in from your team. You're going to plan, run, and record meetings, develop and oversee communications amongst the team. You're going to manage the team's progress through various avenues, including GitHub and a project management software, most likely Smartsheet. You're going to oversee documentation. Sometimes that also includes authoring the documentation, repository setup and maintenance, which includes permissions and all kinds of good stuff with that. But also when we onboard a new client, new repositories will need to be set up for them for the various services that we'll be providing. Another one of the really big keys is administration and scheduling. And it seems like for a project manager that's really organized, there's a lot of administration and scheduling. But for those of us that enjoy project management, it's a lot of fun. All right, so the plan in more detail, it's really critical to the project manager to have a measurable plan. Not something that's on chicken scrap on several different places across different resources. It really needs to be in one comprehensive place, particularly in agile specific project management software. That plan is going to need to include tasks, relationships, and dependencies. You're going to want to establish a baseline so that you can be aware of the critical path. You're going to want to assess risk. Typically, that's going to be in time delays, how much time that would be. Is that going to be 1 week risk, 2 week, etc.? And then, of course, keeping it all together within the planning software and statusing your plan as you move along. Buy-in is another critical piece to project management. And some of the practicum projects that I've worked on personally, sometimes buy-in is not there. Sometimes it is there, but still there's a lack of motivation. But when you're working on a project where there's true buy-in, which means that each member of the development team and the leadership team and the stakeholders that are involved, when everybody buys into a project and believes in the spirit of the project and the message and the goals and the accomplishments that should be coming forth, a project moves forward so well. It's something that will really, truly both impress and blow your mind when you get to see and be a part of that. So as a project manager, fostering buy-in is so important. As a project manager, it's important to think about what that is and what it looks like to different people. And like I said, it can be the difference between a project moving forward by leaps and bounds or one that limps along and you kind of have to push everyone along the way and you feel like at the end of the day, you're herding cats. So you're definitely going to want to make sure that you pay attention to buy-in. And some of the ways that that is achieved, that I've seen in my own personal work is if you show your team that you care about the work that you're doing, naturally that's going to rub off on them, most of them hopefully, and that is something that will kind of move your project forward. You're also going to want to lead by example. So make sure there's no do as I say, not as I do. Do your best to always be, being the example to your team and showing the leadership that you have in store for not only yourself, but for your team. It's also important to demonstrate through your actions that you genuinely care about each person's career interests beyond whatever this particular practicum class is. You might be doing web development, you might be in the cloud practicum, you might be in the data sciences practicum, but taking a real keen interest in each member's own career development is going to help them buy into you. Trust me, it's really something that I've seen work over the quarters. You're also going to want to be reasonable about deadlines. We're in a student setting, so we can't force deadlines, and extensions are always necessary because people have lives and sometimes things come up or emergencies or a family member is harmed or something, whatever it is that happens. You have to be able to work with it, which is why, hearkening back to the last slide, the plan is important because if something does come up as the project manager, you're going to want to help steer the team through it. The other thing that I think is super important, and I highly recommend it, is that to connect with every member of your team. So in some capacities as a project manager, I'm busy working a lot of the times with the lead developer, at my other project managers, and then likely the product owners. But that means that I may not have as much time for the developers or talk to them as often as I talk with the other team members. And I think that it's really critical for a project manager to make the time to connect with each member of the team, including those developers that you don't always talk to, because in doing so, and in my case, I was able to find, you're going to discover that they have other interests. One of my developers currently right now is interested in being in leadership. So that's something that I wouldn't have found out had I not attempted to connect with that person. A next part, and I keep using this word critical because this is another critical piece. And this one might seem like a bear at times. At other times, when you're really stoked and pumped about the project, it just flows naturally. But it is your job as the project manager to plan, run, and record. And by that, what I mean is that you're going to be scheduling meetings with your team. A lot of the work is going to be done async, but a lot of it is going to be done together. Ideally, outside of class, you're going to want to have with your group, if that's how the dynamic of the classes is that you're broken into groups, you're going to want to meet with your team probably once a week outside of class. You're going to want to, as best as you can, come to all class meetings, and then schedule one-on-ones as possible. But in the weekly meeting, it's often helpful to do a scrum, to do old business, new business, all of that stuff. Stand-ups for the quarter are going to be something that will be done on Canvas in writing, and put links to your work so that the professor can evaluate and grade that. So weekly stand-ups may or may not be part of meetings that you run, but if they are, you're going to want to record comments and record notes of some of the things that you learn. In some environments, stand-ups happen daily. That won't be the case for us. We'll be recording in Canvas, as I mentioned. The technical project manager will create the meeting agenda even if other stakeholders lead the meeting. And sometimes what that means is that to keep things organized and on track, the project manager, for example, or the technical project manager may create the meeting notes in the agenda, and then the lead developer runs the meeting. That might be one instance. There might be another instance where the technical project manager creates the meeting and the notes and all of that stuff, and then the product owner and client step in and kind of talk to the group about different things, and they run the meeting. So the technical project manager and or project managers will make an agenda and take notes of the meetings. And ideally, to support whoever is running the meeting, whether that be a TPM, a lead developer, or the client and the product owner, a second project manager should probably take notes. It's really difficult to lead a meeting and take really articulate notes. There's a lot of stuff that you end up talking about, and you don't want to forget anything. And the best way not to forget is to take good notes. So make sure that as a project manager, you have a backup as much as possible to take the notes while you're administering any kind of meetings. The team communication plan, right now, it's a little bit arcane. And by that, I mean that we're just doing it on a Google folder within a Google Word doc. It's going to have, the meeting, the notes, the time of it, the recording linked to it. And then in like a group setting where you're broken into groups by the professor, you might have a scrum within your communication plan to kind of make sure that that's all easily accessible to the entire team. But again, you're still going to want to be making your scrum notes via Canvas for the professor. For the individual client communication plans, at this present time, Belinda's Closet lives in Notion. there's two ways that Notion does that. There's ways where anybody who reads a file obviously can make notes and changes and corrections to it, very much like a Google folder. But then there's also a read-only version. And so right now, Belinda's is set up in Notion with all of their critical documents and information and communication from the team to the client. And it's static, so Belinda's folks can only read it. North Seattle Events, though, there's a little bit of a different team as far as the project manager and project owner are concerned. And they elected to use a combination of Google Folder and Notion, but I believe Google Folder is the primary place where the communication stuff lives. The communication plan should include a standard cadence for the product owner to connect with a client. A good rule of thumb is that the product owner be in contact with the client weekly. Sometimes during the summer months, that might be every other week, even if it's just to say, hey, everything is on track and going well. But there needs to be some sort of a cadence within the communication plan that both the client agrees to and the students understand. The project manager also needs to manage the progress. This is going to be sprint planning. In some cases, a plan may be set up for the entire quarter. In other cases, you might be working, say for a summer session, kind of like this one now, and you might be kind of winging a little bit because you're seeing where things go and kind of playing out a couple of different ideas. But sprint planning will either be done, many sprints in advance or one at a time. Generally, the project manager will kind of free write a sprint plan with advice from the product owner if they're not really certain exactly what it is, because it's a little bit meatier on the development side. The product owner and the project manager will kind of pair program what that sprint looks like and also seek any information and advice from the technical project manager or the lead developer as needed. This is also going to depend kind of on the style of the project manager for the particular client. Some like to assign issues to their developers. Some like the developers to self-assign the issues. But in any case, you're going to be setting up issues and assigning perhaps, but the issue is a story. So you're going to make sure you're framing it in that context. There are currently issue and PR templates that have already been pre-established, but as a project manager, you're going to not only want to enforce using those, but maintain and edit those as necessary. And then you're also, when creating issues, it's important to add story points. We have kind of come to the consensus that a story point is worth 30 minutes. So if you add, 3 story points to an issue, you're expecting that particular task to take 90 minutes. And this is just a good thing to help not only busy students determine their workload, but also for the project manager to know how much things are going to take, when they're doing their larger overall plan. Statusing issues. This is also something that's going to kind of be determined by the project manager. There may be some preference towards self-statusing so that when a developer is done, the project manager will allow the developers to do that. In other cases, the project manager may want to status the issues themselves. But in either case, you can't leave it to developers because they're busy in developing, and that's kind of where their minds should be. But the issue board and the Kanban board must be cleaned up by the project manager and kept up to date. That's another thing. And, the Kanban board especially can get really messy, especially if you've got 4 columns that include a backlog. Like, things can pile up really, really bad. So it's definitely something that you're going to want to do to keep the Kanban board neat and clean. And also, now that I'm thinking about this, there is a topic that I need to add in this slide that I didn't. And that is keeping the branching within the repository clean. And typically what that's going to look like is developers are going to forget. So is a lot of people who approve PR requests and merge them are going to forget who is supposed to delete the branch. So the project manager, at the very least, is going to be making sure that the branching is clean, and just making sure that that is part of their rotation of things that they're looking for. In terms of progress, you're also going to want to avoid creep. So there's going to be times when your product owner comes and says, I want this, and this website should do this, and this mobile app should do that, but you're already on a plan, you've already established the baseline, and so making any changes or concessions will be something that will need to be worked out through the lead developer, the professor, and then kind of circled back through the project management team in terms of adding things. But it's definitely important to keep your eye out for what has already been approved. And if something comes up, it's definitely an okay idea to talk about it and bring it up. But don't just allow developers to add issues or content or features that haven't already been determined. Auditioning repositories is something that's also important. And I say this not necessarily perhaps as something that the project manager should make like a weekly task to do on their own, but when they're in there adding issues, you're going to end up noticing that, oh, this one hasn't been status, and this one I know that it's closed because I talked to the developer and they told me that it was done, but the issue's still open. And so auditing repositories is simply when you're going through there and working it around, just keep your eye out for things that that are done, or branches that should be deleted, or anything that needs to be cleaned up, and just make sure that you're keeping an eye out on that. The second to last thing is stretching a sprint. Sometimes you might plan for something for sprint one, but because of a delay and, say funding, for example, you might have to move that issue a couple of sprints down. Another one was like Belinda's Closet. Like they weren't quite ready to start sending over, photos and entries of submissions for their products. So we've had to stretch that sprint. It's moved probably 4 times now in terms of it started out at sprint 1 because we thought that they were going to be a little bit more organized. It turns out that they were working out a few kinks on their side. So in any case, stretching a sprint is definitely something that it's just basically the idea of moving it forward as you need to. Obviously, don't move something forward that needs to be done, or another thing is dependent upon without talking to the team. But stretching a sprint, I think, is a useful tool in terms of working through a plan. And that kind of segues into assigning a sprint number for an issue. Like I said, the processing inventory, I thought it was going to start in sprint 1 and it didn't. And we've just kept moving it back, even to the point where I've invited the developers to start creating their own fake products to work with as examples of inventory. And we might not even ask Belinda's to go through with that until we're a little bit further along with the app. Documentation. So the project manager is definitely going to want to oversee documentation. And sometimes developers will write their own documentation, especially for things that are really technically savvy that they've been working on specifically. Sometimes it's more like the README or the wiki or how-tos on things that are a little bit simpler. And on that context, the project manager will likely be the person that writes that documentation. But there's within GitHub, there's the README and the wiki. And then, as I mentioned a few slides back, we do have some templates that are already created, and that includes stuff for pushes, pulls, files, images, and media. So it'll be up to the project manager, like I mentioned before, to kind of maintenance those things, edit them as necessary. A lot of times, because this is an evolutionary process, you'll talk with the product owner or even, team members and determine, as a group, hey, this particular template is not effective, or we need a new one. And so that will be up to the project manager to get that rolling. Also to the Google folder, there's a couple of them, even though a lot of the documentation for Belinda's, for example, is going to live in Notion, we still have the Google folder because we started out with that as like a fundamental place to keep all of the communication documentation. And if anything is in Notion, it already lived in the Google folder. I don't think that we're adding too much extra to the Google folder now that's not extremely necessary, but we at least started that way. And it's going to be something too, like when there comes to onboarding new clients down the road, where you won't know for sure, do I want to use Google Folder or Notion or Coda or something out there that's, you've wanted to try, or you've got a free student license because you're a student and you wanted to have the team give it a go. Those things will come up down the line and you'll end up determining those on together. And then Notion is a lot like Google, so just be careful that you don't end up highlighting something accidentally and deleting it. I've done that before. Even though there's version control with Notion, it definitely gives you a panic when you do something like that. So just beware that you can. GitHub, we've kind of already talked about this, throughout the different slides, but you're gonna, maintain current repos, set up the new ones when additional clients are onboarded, manage student permissions, oversee all issues, and then this is one of the only things that we really haven't talked about yet, and that's really that comes to approving pull requests. I personally, when I'm project managing, I look at all of the Google, GitHub messages, and I read everything that happens, with the pushes and the pull requests. I usually only go through and status or excuse me, approve pull requests if the other developers are busy or there's a backlog. Because I tend to focus more on the project management side of things, and I don't know everything about tech. So I allow the other developers to work on the pull requests. However, as it makes sense, like if there's a backlog or, say, the developers are so deep in work that, they haven't had a chance to review each other's work, that'll be a time when absolutely the project manager is going to want to work on pull requests. And if as working as a project manager, you're also very much interested in being a developer, well, you're going to want to do the pull request either way. Last one is administration and scheduling. So, I talked about buy-in as being something that's critically important in terms of moving a plan forward. I talked about a plan, as something being very critical to keeping you on track and on focus. But beyond that, communication is key. So, we have so many forums to do that. We have Slack, we have email, there's one-on-ones that you can do. There's just virtually all kinds of ways that you can communicate with one another. And it's just really critical in terms of success of your project if the team is aware of what's going on. And in terms of administration, weekly stand-up, if that's something that is not, say you're working on the summer session and that's something that you're doing weekly via Zoom, that's something that the project manager is going to set up, schedule for, and plan for. Scrum reporting, same thing. You're going to want to move your team forward. If you're doing scrums as a group, you're going to probably say each day that the scrum is due, and it's weekly, you're going to have to remind the team that day, hey, when we're meeting later, make sure you have your scrum ready, because a lot of chances are they're not going to just have that ready. So you're going to definitely want to remind. Taking meeting notes is critical. There's that word again, because you talk about so much stuff and you can't remember everything. Like even somebody with a good memory like myself, like I would say maybe 90% of the things I remember, and then like the other 10%, I'm like, oh, I know we talked about it, but I don't remember exactly, And so making sure that you take articulate, copious notes is very important. And if you're giving the meeting, you're going to want to make sure that you have that backup taking notes, as I mentioned. Developing the PM, project manager, and product owner workflow via bi-weeklies. That's something, this video, for example, is the first in the series of what I'm calling the bi-weeklies. And those are meetings for each of the roles to just talk about more things that you can do or think about or even try to improve your game. You know, everybody wants to get better. This is a chance for us to do that. And I think at this point right now, I'm going to keep recording them so that it's easier for people to watch async. And if you're like me, I like watching instructional videos at faster speed, but that's just me. You know, another thing, because you'll be, you know, planning meetings and get-togethers and one-on-ones, etc. A site that we've used over the summer to great success is called whentomeet.com. You just put in, you know, you start it up, you're looking for a time. You know, the first person starts it, you send the same link out, and everybody, like, it just kind of overlaps until you get the darkest green, and that dark green time is where the most people can meet. It's very, very helpful. And then just in general, you're going to be navigating as a project manager, not only a very, very busy schedule yourself, but a very busy team's schedule. So being organized, preparing, you know, if I have a meeting, you know, I want to have a meeting, you know, tomorrow, I'm probably not going to set up a when to meet and send it out today at 6 or 7 tonight. I probably won't get everybody's response. I might have to use Slack. If I'm, you know, planning a meeting for Friday, you know, next Friday, and I've got, you know, today's Friday, you know, and I have that week lead time, when to meet's a good thing. So just in terms of, you know, keeping yourself on track, there's a lot of spinning plates going, and just finding a cadence that's comfortable for you and something that works. It'll take some time, but watch the folks that work, you know, in the technical project manager role. That'll be something that'll be good, you know, because they're going to model the behavior that they're looking to see from their project managers, but then also to the project managers that worked over a summer term on any of the pre-practicum projects. They're going to, you know, have a little bit more understanding of the project, because they'll have, you know, maybe 2 to 3 months before the quarter even starts to find, you know, find out most of the answers, or a lot of the answers, or a lot of the stuff that you're working on. So feel free to lean on them for any support. And then, of course, if you have any questions, reach out to your technical project manager on the team. And then also to, as you might expect, you can reach out to the professor. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. This is the very, very first biweekly meeting. So if my voice sounds a little bit dry, it is. But I was very excited, and I'm looking forward to working with everybody this year. Bye-bye.